Alex Gibney has been called the most important documentarian of our time, one of America's most prolific and successful documentary filmmakers. His latest HBO film is The Inventor, a fascinating inside look at the scandal around the rise and fall of the blood testing startup Theranos. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor here at Gold Derby. Alex, first of all, congratulations on your Emmy nomination. Talk us through the morning of and how you found out about it.
Well, thanks very much. I got an email, so that's the way I often get it. But I was just thrilled and delighted, and particularly because there's so much competition these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, talk us through as well about what inspired you to make this film about Theranos and its founder, Elizabeth Holmes.
Well, it was actually brought to me by Richard Plepler and Graydon Carter. They were the ones who encouraged me to take on the story, and I knew a little bit about it. But the more I learned about it, the more interested I became. And I've done a lot of films about deception and self-deception. And so this seemed to me an opportunity to really dig into the psychology of fraud. And so that's what really motivated me to make the film.
Yeah, actually, a lot of your films are about people who aren't telling the truth or about something controversial. Like This movie ultimately is about a scam, a fraud, a hoax, so to speak. It really surprised me because I felt kind of like a little out of the loop. I had not heard about it at all. And then watching it, I was thinking, this is amazing. What a revolution. And then obviously it just completely goes pear-shaped. I'm wondering why do fraudsters or why do scams fascinate you?
Well, they fascinate me in part because they fascinate a lot of other people. And I think there's something thrilling and about the excitement or naughtiness of doing something wildly wrong, but then also seeing the inevitable reckoning come for those who do lie. At the same time, though, I think there's something about this fraud, and it's something I learned about a lot of frauds I've been associated with, and Enron, for example, comes to mind, particularly Theranos, and indeed Elizabeth Holmes' dad had worked briefly at Enron. I think that the people in the midst of the fraud don't start out running a scam. That's not what they're doing. They're not Bernie Madoff. And I suppose even Bernie Madoff didn't start out, but if he ran a scam for a long time that he knew was a scam, I think key to Elizabeth Holmes and in their own way, even some of the execs at Enron, was that they believed what they were doing was great. They believed that they were great because they were doing something great. But when reality intruded, and it seemed like they weren't going to be perceived as so great, and certainly their companies weren't going to be great at all. They were failing in the things that they thought were succeeding. Instead of admitting that to themselves, they doubled down and they engaged in a kind of self-deception that allowed them to believe that all was well, even though they knew at some level that they were lying. That process really interests me.
Yeah, and I think coupled with the subject matter of what she was trying to achieve. So like for anyone who hasn't seen this yet, Elizabeth Holmes purported to invent a way in which that you could take blood from somebody to obviously test their health, which is so fundamental to our health system, phlebotomy, and but a very tiny little amount, which is just like obviously would make things so much more efficient and effective. And that is such an ideal concept that you wanted it to be successful. And so it's the disappointment for me that when it became all just a big fraud or lie, that's what really seemed to hit me. And that's what I think gives this film a lot of emotional resonance. Do you agree that you were trying to go for that particular angle?
I agree. I think what makes this story so interesting is that her motives seem so noble. And indeed, I think we would all agree that it would be much better if there were blood testing companies that publicly posted their prices, and that their prices were low, and that it wouldn't have to be the invasiveness of a needle, which for some people is a terrifying thing. One of my producers faints when she sees a needle. So all that was great. I mean, the idea of it was so wonderful. And the idea you could be tested, you could self-test all the time. It was a hugely appealing concept. And by the way, I think that's why a lot of people signed on. But I think that is kind of key to the fraud as well, because people want to believe it's possible and want to believe it's true so badly that they suspend any kind of critical faculties. And I think the other thing about Elizabeth that's so interesting is that, going back to this whole idea of self-deception, if you can deceive yourself into believing that what you're saying is good and noble and true, it's much easier to deceive other people. It doesn't seem like you're lying. It seems like you couldn't possibly lie. And a number of people in the film remark on how they just couldn't believe that this woman would actually be lying to them, even though in the film we've shown that she was.
Yeah, that absolutely is key. And it's hard for me to put this in words, but I actually found her so compelling. She's not a villain. And that's what makes the film as well also so incredibly nuanced. It's not binary, is what I think I'm trying to say. And it also uses a really good macro view on Silicon Valley and technology. And I'm wondering if you could talk us through what you were trying to achieve by that more high-level view of what's going on over there.
Well, Silicon Valley has a famous phrase, fake it till you make it. And in a sense, they believe that it's okay to fake it, because ultimately you're just doing beta versions of things that you're ultimately going to get right. So your software doesn't work right now, but over time, your phone app is really going to be fantastic. So what's the difference? But and in some ways that's appealing, because you're setting yourself out to overachieve, to do something spectacular, to be a kind of disruptor in the best sense of the word, right? And so all of that is okay. And indeed, it's not just Silicon Valley, but that's probably part of capitalism too. One of the people we profile in the film, her device was called the Edison. And one of the people we profile in the film was Thomas Edison, the guy who invented the incandescent light bulb. But it turns out that he was the original fake it till you make it guy. He faked demonstrations of the incandescent light bulb. He bought off journalists with stock options. Now the difference is that he made it. He did make it. And also the other difference is he wasn't putting anybody's lives at risk by the development of his technology. But there's something between the fraudster, there are lots of uncomfortable similarities between the fraudster and the visionary. And that, I think, is really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, I'm watching the film and I'm thinking, okay, so she's obviously being painted obviously in a negative light by the end, and I realized she obviously wasn't involved in the making of the film. So can you talk us through how you were able to have so much footage of her talking and being interviewed?
So we reached out to her very early on, and my producer sat down with her for 5 hours, most of which Elizabeth spent asking her questions. And ultimately, we were never able to get her to agree to sit down with our cameras. She kept saying, look, when the company's back on its feet and, humming on all 8 cylinders, then come on back and we'll show you just how great we are. Well, that never happened. So we never had access to Elizabeth herself. Over time, however, we were able to find people inside the company who leaked to us footage of Elizabeth herself, and indeed the company's operations on the inside. Now, many of these films that we ultimately got were shot as kind of promotional fodder by Elizabeth. And indeed, a lot of the long interview segments that we include were shot by the famed documentarian Errol Morris. Yeah. So ultimately, and this, as it happened, was very late in the process. We got about, over 100 hours of footage from inside Theranos, which was vital. And we added to that, stuff that we were able to license from other sources. And and there you have it. So it was weird. We had access to her, but it was a peculiar kind of access. And in a way, that's kind of what the film is about. It's about self-promotion. And so we had her giving up the best version of herself as she saw it. It was her attempt to promote herself. And so in seeing how she promoted herself, you can kind of get insight, not only into the lie, but into how she lied.
Yeah. Your films are often focused on controversial subjects. We've talked about that, but they're also quite timely and relevant. And I always wonder, with you in particular, I've always wanted to ask you this question. What kind of blowback have you received over the years? Like, what's the worst thing that's happened to you because someone has said, this guy needs to shut up. He's a disruptor himself.
I get a lot of pushback online and social media, maybe the toughest part. I mean, I had something like 30 Scientologists show up in my office when, not too long after the premiere of Going Clear. And, Scientologists jumped out of the shadows from time to time when I was doing Going Clear or during the promotion of it. So that may have been the most extreme, but, the Catholic Church was not happy about mea maxima culpa. The U.S. government wasn't particularly happy about Taxi to the Dark Side. And certainly Julian Assange's supporters were not happy about a portrait that was not, a praise poem. So, I do get pushback. But I think that there's safety, I think, in being public and being forthright, and also in terms of making sure that you get the facts right, so people can't challenge you on that. So, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. So I guess I'm becoming a little bit more comfortable in the kitchen. But it comes with the territory.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good side of it is you've been so acclaimed over the years, and your awards history is mind-boggling. I'm going to try to see if I could encapsulate some of it. Taxi to the Dark Side, Oscar. N. Ryan, Oscar nominated. Mea Maxima Culpa, Emmy and Peabody wins. History of the Eagles, Emmy. Mr. Dynamite, Peabody and Grammy, a nomination. Armstrong Live, BAFTA. We Steal Secrets, BAFTA. Client 9 nominated for 3 Emmys. That's insane. What do awards mean to you?
Well, they mean a lot, but not just to me, but to the people who work on the films, because, they're a recognition, often by your peers, that you're doing something right. They're not the be-all and end-all, because the be-all and end-all is really connecting with people, and I have to say, like recently, I know that, for example, on The Inventor, a lot of people watched it. Millions of people watched it when it was on HBO. Recently, friends of mine and myself have been amazed to see, people watching it on planes constantly, and they've got a lot of choices on planes. So that it seems to be something compelling about it. And that's the satisfaction that's really powerful, is that you feel like you're reaching people, and that it's making a difference in terms of how they think about the world. That's really important.
Yeah. I remember I first kind of became interested in your work with Taxi. It's one of my favorite films of that particular year. It really affected me. And I remember when you won the Oscar alongside Eva Orner, you said, let's turn this country around and move away from the dark side and back to the light. And I'm wondering, 10 years later, how fascinating is it that film is still so relevant and timely given what's happening in the United States and in the world today?
I'm sad in a way that it's still so relevant, because, I had hoped, particularly with the subject of torture, and that film did penetrate in some unexpected places. It became required viewing at the Army JAG School. It was shown often at West Point. In the military, I think there was a reckoning that torture was a terrible idea. But now you have a president who talks about how we got to do worse than waterboarding. Torture is good. And so that is kind of dismaying. At the same time, it does continue to, stand as a story which really remains relevant for that reason, and people reach out to it, and that's important to me.
Yeah. When you won, I recall that you also said, you joked about how your wife was hoping you'd make a romantic comedy, and it got me thinking, what genres, subjects have you not tackled yet that you think you would like to one day?
Well, the romantic comedy would be one. I was always terrified that in my romantic comedy everybody would die.
Yeah.
But I think that it would be fun to do a comedy. I wonder what that would be like. I also thought about doing a documentary musical. I wonder what that would be like.
Yeah.
Obviously, I've done some films about music, but a musical in which people suddenly burst into song. In fact, that was briefly the conceit we had for Enron, because in the rough cut of the film, we had so many Tom Waits songs that we thought and this was before, I was willing to do my own narration. Instead of hiring an actor, we thought, well, what if we get Tom Waits to narrate? And then he'll be narrating, and then every so often he'll burst into song like a musical. Well, we ran it by him, and he didn't think it was such a good idea, though he did give us an idea for another song. I think that it would be fun to kind of push some boundaries. And now I'm getting a little bit more into the fiction world or the scripted world, and finding ways of marrying, sort of nonfiction and fiction forms, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, for the time being, we're focused on The Inventor, and good luck at the Emmys later this year, and all the best for your upcoming projects, Alex. Thanks for your time today.
Many thanks.
And Derbyites, go to goldderby.com right now, make your predictions so you can compete against know-it-alls like me. But before you go, click subscribe and watch our great chats with top contenders.